Hi everyone, hope you're keeping well. Coming to live from my lounge. Today is Saturday the 5th of February, and I just thought I'd provide a brief discussion on the problematic nature of discussing reality and the infinite recourse of rabbit holes whenever it is that we do so. So, reality itself, I think, is an abstract concept that we use without understanding or perhaps even caring to stop and think about what it is that we mean when we use the term. Did something perhaps separate from us create it? Or are we subjectively and or collectively manifesting and perpetuating it? Or even the appearance of it? Maybe a good place to start off would be an Oxford Dictionary definition of reality, and they firstly describe it as the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them, such as he refuses to face reality. And secondly, the state or quality of having an existence or substance, such as youth, when death has no reality. But I don't think we've ever got any sort of realistic hope of being able to agree on or conceptually nail down with definite certainty what it is that we mean, barring that we largely agree to disagree on what it is that we actually mean, or perhaps agreeing that on closer analysis we're not sure what it is. So we can easily sort of challenge somebody's ontological security and worldviews by raising it as a topic of discussion, or even alienate ourselves by daring to do so. It's questionable whether we even have a right to to do so with other people, given like how problematic a discussion it can be. I think perhaps the only thing we can sort of relatively surmise is that we may share aspects of something that we call reality, or indeed be under some sort of collective illusion. Furthermore, that it isn't what we're told it is. Even then, I don't think anybody will quite fully agree or even be able to say with exact certainty what it truly is. Perhaps barring a select few people with knowledge that's beyond our permission or capacity to access, or higher forms of intelligence, that are beyond our capacity to sort of truly process and understand and make sense of. So, reality is something that we subjectively interpret via the senses, and we this is what we then regard to be reality, and we submit this to the repository of memory. Yet the senses are arguably highly misleading and only really a tool for discernment, as in this object from that object. But is there even any separation? Do we labour under the illusion of being a self? There's a fascinating quote from Matthew McConaughey's character Rust Cole in True Detective Series 1, which I'd recommend anybody with a strong stomach who hasn't watched it to give it a chance, because some of the dialogue in it is fantastic. So the quote goes as following: I think human consciousness is a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self aware. Nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We're creatures that should not exist by natural law. We're things that labour under the illusion of having a self, an accretion of sensory, experience, and feeling, programmed with total assurance that we are all each somebody, when in fact everybody is nobody. So is there even truly an I, a we, or a they? Again, is there any separation? Is there even a collective? It's easy to argue or suggest that we might be like spectres or ghosts sharing a dream of reality and seeming separation or collective experience. And it can often help to think for yourself, or if the story of you's incredibly painful or becoming an obsession that's damaging you or others, that's becoming hard to snap out of, to think as if you're part of a collective or collective nothingness. But I'm a somebody, surely. I have all these memories. But are they your own? And even then, who or what is the thinker or the dreamer? Maybe it's all just an experience or relay or of infinite computation. Might consciousness itself be digital or some fundamental property of everything that is? Are our subjective or collective experiences real? And does the latter suggest that some sort of shared ground, a meeting point of alignment in viewpoints per se? Even then, we can find ourselves not quite agreeing or being persuaded by others to think in a certain way or see the world in a different way to how we truly think, which overrides our own thought patterns. We can easily be sort of mesmerized by the seeming certainty of others, their charisma, or via hypnotic or subliminal suggestion. I think hence we ultimately end up sort of fearing to disagree, or perhaps to even think for ourselves, not wanting to make ourselves a target for individuals or entire groups to turn on us like agents in the Matrix films and direct their personal or collective criticisms, which in turn stimulate sensory feelings of shame, alienation, being different. Unencumbered subjective experience without relying on others might be what feels most real to us, yet we're taught to become dependent on the other, perhaps for the purpose of alignment. Perhaps the answer is not really to care too much, or if indeed at all, about what the people think. When I look at it, I think the only thing I can say with reasonable certainty is that I know nothing, and that nothing might actually be the only thing that's truly real. I studied Jean Baudrillard at university, and he speaks of hyperreality, which I think if you think about the simulated overlays of the world that we live in nowadays, we don't truly experience many a thing. We just observe it through some sort of receptacle, such as a TV or a handheld smart device. So, we're just witnessing some sort of copy, really. And he comes up with the concepts of simulacra and simulacrum, which briefly are just sort of representations which ultimately, I suppose, they just mask the absence of reality. And I think my subjective interpretation of his concept reminds me something towards a platonic world of forms. And he was famed for writing an article entitled "The Gulf War Did Not Happen," which he doesn't mean that it actually literally did not happen, more so that it didn't happen in the way we're taught to think of it as having happened. But then, does anything? And is any of this real? Whatever reality is, again, potentially going back to some sort of consensus dream or a dream that we separately experience. Oh. Furthermore, what of alternative realities or multiverses? So maybe all that is just purely perception or the illusion of perceived experience, and that's subjective. Yet, unless you live in complete isolation or you've spent a lifetime or a long period of time living alone, it's often reinforced by a collective and wanting to fit in or a need to, or, to find something tangible. Always makes me think of that old adage of if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear or see it, then did it happen? And I think, well, that's supposing there's an actual true reality in which there's a forest for the tree to fall in, and then for people, both individual and collectives, to argue over such matters. Yeah, this is one of many sort of rabbit holes of infinite recourse, and I suppose you could argue it's all subjectively objective and up for discussion, yet I don't think any answer will truly be found in this life, or that many of us will, just maybe a select few, or even perhaps beyond this life, unless it is that we return to sort of complete understanding. It makes you question whether we're all a part of God and deluded into thinking we're separate from whatever that is, or do we or others separate ourselves from God by thinking we're an individual within a collective? I think we all seem to see reality in similar but different ways. I've often analogized this as like looking at a series of sort of concentric or overlapping circles, uh, you know, where the centre provides some sort of collective meeting point. Even then, people might only still vaguely agree or just be going along with things. If you think of the last sort of couple of years. But I suppose if you look at images of cymatic patterns or those of church windows, I suppose that sort of analogizes what I'm sort of getting at. So, my reality might bear similarity to yours, but it's certainly not identical because we all seem to have our own slightly sort of unique take. We might agree in certain aspects, yet not in others, hence we'll never quite fully agree. So I don't see reality as being this fixed idea, as if it's, something that we universally agree on. Not that necessarily we quite should agree, because I think some of that is actually the beauty of this reality, whatever that is. You know, if you say, for instance, if you put a number of people in a room, a child, a young adult, a supposedly mature adult, a geriatric with dementia, a schizophrenic, or somebody suffering a psychotic break with delusions such as auditory or visual hallucinations. Maybe we could complicate matters more by sort of adding to each of these age categories of determination, you know, people with learning difficulties, and it becomes fundamentally even more slippery a notion to actually determine what reality is. I suppose you could also argue that perhaps the latter three, people suffering some sort of psychotic break with dementia or some sort of learning disability, could we argue that they're actually closer to seeing reality for what it truly is? As they might be less open to persuasion by others as to how their senses enable them to determine their experience of reality. So, you could say they might be subject to the guidance of others. You could easily argue that. But it's worth pondering over. And, I think, again, we might be certain of how we've interpreted an experience, say, as a child or an adult, only later to look back on it and see things very differently. You know, what was or were I, we, or they thinking? Perhaps with the perspective or via the, view of others. Does this help or does it hinder potentially? I think our subjective interpretation of reality might be the most important, but it might relate to why we seem to be here, yet is there a purpose? Perhaps so, perhaps not. You know, worth considering. Another one of McConaughey's character's quotes is, because his character, you could argue, is a schizoid. And the quote goes as following: "Back then, the visions, most of the time I was convinced that I'd lost it, but there were other times where I thought I was mainlining the secret truth of the universe." So, time's definitely another problematic aspect here in regard to discerning reality is, your opinions change over time, and yet we aren't able to say with any exact certainty what time is. If you were able to view the entirety of your life, then our understanding would be fundamentally different, which perhaps suggests that our experiences of reality are purely projections instead of solid structures, which at the time we might be either confused or completely certain of. So, should we be able to view things such as reality within the context of the entirety of time, again, whatever time is, then we'd likely understand many things, if not everything, differently. So perhaps time's just a framework or space within which for, interpretations of experiences might be said to take place. McConaughey's character comes up with another couple of interesting quotes. First being, "Death created time to grow the things that it would kill," and the second of which being, "Time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're going to do over and over again." So another possibility is that reality, whatever it is, might just be a fluid and dynamic property as opposed to being something that's of tangible certainty, both on an individual or even a collective sort of level. Consciousness is perhaps I would have thought, the most problematic of all terms in relation to reality. Um, as what is it, and what might be said to truly differentiate our waking experience from those in dreams, plus our experiences from those of others. Is it just all subjective or objective relativity? I think we are very much like the dreamer who dreams about dreaming a dream, or might our dreams actually be sort of less encumbered by the framework of the reality that we're taught to believe or not believe in. Both dreams and the waking state might be subconsciously determined or externally influenced by other factors. Or, is it just a sort of fundamentally problematic sort of notion what consciousness is? One fascinating quote that Cole comes up with is that I think human consciousness is a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware. Nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We're creatures that should not exist by natural law. We're things that labour under the illusion of having a self, an accretion of sensory, experience and feeling, programmed with total assurance that we're each somebody, when in fact everybody is nobody. Another one of his. This place is like somebody's memory of a town, and the memory's fading. It's like there was never anything here but jungle. The final of which I'll come to a close on is to realise that all your life, all your love, all your hate, all your memory, all your pain, it was all the same thing. It was all the same dream. A dream that you had inside a locked room. A dream about being a person. So it's a lot to consider, but I know I've probably jumped about and waffled on for long enough. So highly problematic sort of notion, really, isn't it? And I think the more sort of questions you ask, well, they're not even answers, really, are they? It just leaves you with more questions. So I think my advice really is just to smile and laugh, as either none or exceptionally few of us actually know or have the slightest idea of what it is that we mean when we're talking about reality. We just think we do, or we might. So I'll leave it at that. Have a good day, everyone. Bye bye.